Welcome to CIS 140M, Windows Operating Systems 1. In this lecture, we're going to be covering Chapter 1 of your textbook, which is What's New in Windows, and Chapter 2 of your textbook, which is Installing, Configuring, and Deploying Windows 10. Again, in this lecture, we're going to be covering new and updated features in Windows 10, and we're going to be covering some Windows 10 installation concepts. So Windows 10 features a new user interface experience. The Windows 10 user's experience feels a lot like a smooth evolution of Windows 7. It starts with the Windows desktop. Some fundamental changes in the core features to the user interface experience are the File Explorer, which has been renamed from Windows Explorer, and the Microsoft Office style ribbon bar included into the File Explorer. It's a very seamless transition if you've used any of the newer versions of Microsoft Office. The new Start menu, it feels a lot like if you had taken the Windows 7 Start menu and smashed it together with the Windows 8 Metro user interface. And it kind of creates a much more clean and user-friendly interface from Windows 8. So just to illustrate what the last slide was talking about, I've got my Windows 10 virtual machine running here. The Start menu here, we can see it's a lot different than some of the previous operating systems where you can see that there's a little bit more involved in the Start menu. First off, from the bottom here, we have Cortana, which we'll talk about at a later date. Cortana basically enhances the Windows search feature to include some speech interaction, among other things. If you've used OK Google or Siri, it's Microsoft's version of that. On the left-hand side here, we can see that we have all of our applications. This is kind of like clicking Show All Apps or all programs in previous versions of the Start menu. We also, on the right-hand side here, we've got a picture of, or we would have a picture of our user account or our user. We can click that to get to a bunch of different things, such as locking the computer, signing out, or changing user account settings. We have the settings menu here, which we're going to cover in much more detail in a later module. This basically allows us access to change all of the various settings of your computer. We've got the Start button on the left-hand side here, which we can use to update and restart or update and shut down. If I didn't have updates pending, it wouldn't say update here. One of the biggest enhancements to the Start menu is the addition of the live tiles. If any of you are coming from Windows 8 and are now using Windows 10, you probably remember clicking on the Start menu and getting a whole new user interface that pops up. While this was really good for tablets and touchscreen PCs, it wasn't so good for what Microsoft users mostly use Microsoft operating systems for, which is a desktop. We see this is a common complaint among end users and IT administrators as well. We see in the Server 2012 operating system, they also have included this interface, which can be a little bit clunky. But now with Windows 10, we have a newer Start menu. It includes these live tiles here. The live tiles you can customize. You can have it launch applications. Basically, it replaces widgets in Windows 10, in Windows 7. So you can have various widgets. You can see here we have the weather. You also get some integration with other Microsoft services like Xbox and Office, and there's a bunch of other customizations that your book will discuss. So Windows 10 also features enhanced backup and recovery applications. One of the options that you have is to do a push button reset, which will basically allow you to reset your operating system to factory settings without having to go through the whole hassle of a clean installation. It used to be you had to put the installation media in the CD drive or install it from a USB flash drive, and now provided the recovery files are still intact, you have the option to just hit a button and then restore your operating system to factory settings. And we will cover that in our backup and recovery module in more detail. You also have the option to automate the process of a clean installation with the option to keep your data or to wipe it clean. So if you're coming from Windows 7 or Windows 8, doing an upgrade installation or a clean installation will keep your data. It's sort of like there was a feature in Windows 10 called Windows Easy, or excuse me, in Windows 7 called Windows Easy Transfer, which would do this for you. But now it's just built into the operating system. So they've made migrating your operating system from Windows 7 or 8 to Windows 10 a lot easier. You can also undo the Windows 10 upgrade and restore a previous version of Windows. So say you're coming from Windows 7 and you do an upgrade installation and upgrade to Windows 10, and something goes awry, or your application doesn't work, or maybe you're getting frequent blue screens, you can undo the Windows 10 upgrade with the push of a button. I know when I upgraded to Windows 10 the first time, I ran into a few issues with my laptop that hadn't been resolved. This was when Windows 10 was back in beta, and this was my work laptop, so I needed it. And I used this option to downgrade back to Windows 7, and it's very, very easy and very quick. Windows 10 also features an enhanced task manager. It gives you more information about running processes. There's actually a new tab for managing and maintaining some processes, and it gives you detailed performance information. In a later module, we're going to be talking about performance monitoring and kind of getting the most out of your system. And Task Manager is a really instrumental tool for being able to manage your system's performance. So Windows 10 gives you a lot more insight and a lot more data into how your machine's performing overall. In addition to that, they've also consolidated some of the features that were spread throughout the operating system into the Task Manager, and we'll take a look at that at a future date. So just to give you a little preview of the Task Manager, because it will be helpful for some of your labs before we look at the Task Manager in more detail, let's just take a look at how to get there. You can right-click your Start menu or your taskbar here, and then you can click Task Manager, and it will pop open the Task Manager here. For those of you that have seen the Task Manager in Windows 7 or Windows 8, you can see that this is a little bit more Spartan at first glance. There's not a whole lot here. It's basically just showing you your running application. In this case, I'm just running the settings menu. If you click more detail, though, you're able to see the full Task Manager. This gives you several different tabs: processes, performance, app history, so these would be apps and not applications, startup, users, details, and services. So again, we're going to be covering this in a lot more detail in a future module. I just wanted to give you a heads up and show you how to get there. You can also get there by pressing Control-Alt-Delete on your keyboard, or if you're in a virtual machine, VirtualBox, you'll have to use the input settings to issue Control-Alt-Delete. So that would be Input, Keyboard, send Control-Alt-Delete. And then you can launch Task Manager from there as well. So one of the new things about Windows 10 is the inclusion of Microsoft's new web browser, Microsoft Edge. Edge is a very minimalist, quick, user-friendly web browser. It's a lot more Spartan, similar to the Task Manager we looked at earlier, in that there's not a whole lot of options that are presented to the user by default. One of the great new things about Edge is that it has a reading view button, which will reformat and rearrange the text on your screen from any website to make the reading experience a little bit more easy to digest. It's easier to look at, and if you're on a tablet or a phone using Windows 10, then it'll be easier to read whatever website you're connected up to. Internet Explorer is still available. It's on IE 11 as of the time of this recording, or at the time of this recording. And many IT professionals still recommend Internet Explorer. It gives you a lot more integration with Active Directory, which we'll learn about later, and group policy. But Edge is definitely up and coming, and it is actually, again, included by default. So for the first time in probably 20 years or so, Internet Explorer is not the default web browser in a Microsoft operating system. One of the other things that Windows 10 includes that's more internet based is the idea that Windows 10 will connect automatically if you sign in with a Microsoft account to Microsoft OneDrive, Office 365, and Azure Active Directory. So OneDrive, for those of you that don't know, is basically online file storage. If you've ever used Dropbox or a similar cloud-based file storage utility, OneDrive is Microsoft's flavor of that. You get a certain amount of storage space for free with OneDrive, and you can, of course, pay Microsoft monthly for more storage. Office 365 is Microsoft's cloud-based version of their Office line. So this will be PowerPoint, Excel, Word. You get some additional features with Office 365 that you wouldn't otherwise get with some of their other products. And Azure Active Directory is Microsoft's online version of their really popular authentication control mechanism, Active Directory, which again, we will talk about in a later module. So just as a really brief introduction to Microsoft Edge, we can see here that the Edge browser, their icon looks very similar to Internet Explorer. It's just a big E. If you click on it, it will launch. I have here just an MSN article. I just wanted to show you really quickly the reading view. That would be this option right here. Now, if you scroll down, we can see here we have an article from MSN.com. You can see that there's, a pretty typical web page. But if you wanted to just sift through the article information and view that rather than view all of the rest of the web page, you can click this reading button. And then it's going to reformat the page so it looks more like you're just reading a news article rather than looking at a website. So we can see we've got the picture of this. We have the text, and we don't see all the ads or anything like that. This week, I definitely, if you haven't already done so, encourage you to go through and play with Microsoft Edge. There are a lot of different features that I think are worth taking a look at, and it loads fairly quickly in comparison to some other browsers out there. Last thing I want to show you here on this slide, if you want to get Internet Explorer back, you can click Start, you can go to Settings, that will launch this menu right here. Then we can click on System, Default Apps, and then we'll go through and we can change the web browser to Internet Explorer. Now here it's going to prompt you saying before you switch, go ahead and try Microsoft Edge. It's new and fast and the new hotness in Windows 10. We're going to say switch anyway, and then that will switch our browser back to Internet Explorer. Now you can see here the icons stayed the same. That's because this is a link to Edge. If we want to get Internet Explorer to show up on the taskbar, we'll click Start, and then we're just going to type Internet, and then Internet Explorer comes up. Then we can right click it and we can pin to taskbar. And then if we click on that, that will open up Internet Explorer. So Microsoft has changed the way that they apply updates to your machine. So this will be security updates, feature updates, things of that nature. So in previous versions of Windows, you used to have 4 different options you could select for updating. Now you only have one option, which is you're going to get all of the updates from Microsoft, whether you want them or not. Now you can defer upgrades or updates, but ultimately your machine's going to download and install them unless you turn off the update service, which we will talk about in a later module. But the idea behind this is in previous versions of the operating system, updates were more heavily user managed. So they would rely on people who were non-technical to be able to update and manage their machine, which as they discovered wasn't a super reliable method for ensuring security and feature updates got applied to every operating system. So now they're sort of forcing you to update, which definitely has its pros and cons. But we can talk more about that in a later module. So Windows also is being now delivered as a service. So this will be called Windows as a Service. One of the things you're going to read about in your textbook is that Windows 10 is going to be the last consumer purchasable option from Microsoft. So there's not going to be a Windows 11. Basically, what we're going to just see is feature updates and upgrades to Windows 10 over time. So this is Windows as a service. Users can choose how soon they want to receive updates. So again, you can opt into receiving your updates very quickly, or you can defer them. In the next slide, we're going to see some of the update tracks that you can apply to your machine, or you can opt into with your machine. So I mentioned in the last slide, Windows is now being delivered as a service. So you're going to get an update to your operating system whether you like it or not. This is really similar to how Apple's doing their updates, where you've got OS X, but you have different versions of OS X, like Mountain Lion, for example. So in the Windows world, we have the concept of flights, which is groups of people with access to the latest version of the operating system, and each flight reaches a larger number of people. So first off, we can see here that we have the engineering builds. So these are the pre-production builds that occur or that happen before. So yeah, these are the engineers that are at Microsoft that are developing the updates to your operating system. Then Microsoft pushes their updates out to the broad Microsoft internal validation team. So they're a team that just validates the updates that the engineers have created. Again, this is still internal to Microsoft. So once these two guinea pigs have vetted that part of the operating system, then it gets pushed out to the insider preview branch. So this is something that you as a person, you as an end user, can opt into. So if you're interested in receiving updates and being one of the several million guinea pigs that Microsoft is going to use to test their update, you can opt into the insider preview and you can get updates before everyone else does. Then it's pushed out to the current branch. So this would be typically home users. So these would be hundreds of millions of people. And this happens 4 to 6 months, about 10 months after the insider preview, about 10 months after the engineers have had a chance to validate. Then finally, it gets pushed off to businesses. So this is the current branch for business. So this gets pushed off to the enterprise ultimate professional crowd. And this is done after 8 months of time. The current branch is the official release that's installed by PC manufacturers and is available to the general public. So after a major update is released, then the manufacturers will get the current branch as well as the general public, and then this is what you'll see come pre-installed on machines that are released or that are sold by HP, Dell, Microsoft, or HP, Dell, Microsoft, companies like that. All right, so now that you know a little bit more about what's new in Windows 10, let's talk about how to install and configure Windows 10. So the first thing you want to note, and this goes for any operating system installation or software installation for that matter, is the minimum requirements. So the minimum requirements for Windows 10 are the processor must be 1 gigahertz or faster, must have at least 1 gigabyte of RAM for 32-bit installations or 2 gigabytes of RAM for 64-bit installations. It must have at least 16 gigabytes of free space, and it must have a graphics card that supports Microsoft DirectX 9 with WDDM driver. Now, one thing to note is that these are the minimum requirements for Windows 10. These are the bare minimum you'd need to actually run the operating system. Now, while the operating system would run with the system of these requirements, it won't run well. So it's important to take into account things like your software that you're running. If you're a gamer, you probably want something that's far better than what is the minimum. Or if you do system intensive things like AutoCAD, video rendering, things like that, those can all impact the performance of your machine. So while these are the minimum requirements, they aren't necessarily the best requirements or the best recommendation for running Windows 10. So keep that in mind when planning your build. So let's talk about some compatibility problems you might run into. So first off, if the device is already running Windows 8.1, it should be compatible with Windows 10. Windows 10 setup includes a compatibility checker, so make sure that when you are thinking about running the upgrade from Windows 8 or Windows 7 to Windows 10, that you run the compatibility checker. This will give you a comprehensive list of all of the things that your system is doing well on and is compatible with Windows 10, and it'll also give you a list of things that your system needs before you're able to run Windows 10 well. Now, most modern computers, and I'd say most computers built within the last 5 years or so, should be able to run Windows 10 with no problem. This, of course, depends on the system specifications, so make sure that you're checking that before you're upgrading to Windows 10. But in general, Windows 10 has been a pretty compatible OS with multiple different types of hardware. So let's talk about the different types of licenses that Microsoft offers for Windows 10. Now, Microsoft licensing can be kind of confusing depending on who you talk to and which what you're looking for in an operating system, whether it be the server operating system or the client operating system like Windows 10 is. So make sure that you take some time to fully understand the different license types and what those license types entail. So first off, we've got the full license type. So this is sold directly to consumers. So this would be something you could buy off Amazon or eBay or any other reputable source. Maybe not eBay, but this can be installed on a computer that was not sold with Windows originally, or can be used as an upgrade. So if you have a computer that has a copy of Windows XP on it, or Windows 7, or heck, even a Mac, you can use a full license to install Windows 10 and not be out of compliance. The other great thing about full licenses is that they can be transferred to different computers. So if you have a gaming PC and you decide you want to upgrade to a newer one, you can transfer the license from one computer to the other and not have to rebuy it. Now, one thing you can't do, or you can't legally do, is you can't activate the same license of Windows 10 on each one of those computers and have them both be in use at the same time. In that instance, you'd have to buy another copy if you wanted to have them both run and be compliant with Windows licensing. The next type of licensing is OEM, or Original Equipment Manufacturer. So this would be the license that would be included with brand new computers. And in general, with OEMs, this would be locked to the computer. So this would be a computer that you would get from Dell or HP. And essentially what they do is they include the OEM license now in the BIOS. So oftentimes you can't even view the license. It's not like the product key that used to come taped to the bottom of a laptop or a desktop. The next type of license is an upgrade license. So an upgrade license will upgrade a computer that's running Windows 7 or Windows 8 to Windows 10. Now, keep in mind this is an upgrade license, so it's different than a full license. Upgrade licenses are generally cheaper than full licenses are, but they've got some disadvantages, like they can't be transferred to other computers. The last type is a volume license. So this is sold in bulk to corporate, government, nonprofit, and educational customers. Typically this is for businesses, and this is upgrade only. So in this case, Windows 10 is a little bit different than previous versions, but with a volume license, you can effectively what you'll get with a volume license is you'll get one license key. So I think it's 25 digits. And you'll be able to use that for all of the computers in your environment. Now, the advantage of a volume license key is if you're mass deploying images of Windows 10 to all of your computers, using a volume license key, you won't have to go to each one to maintain the license. The license is just that one license key that applies for all of the computers in your environment. Now, typically these can be quite spendy, depending on what type of license you get. So these would be typically purchased either directly from Microsoft or as part of an agreement from a third-party reseller like Dell. So Microsoft recommends that you use the online upgrade for anyone upgrading from Windows 7 or Windows 8.1, but you also have the option to perform a custom installation which allows you to boot from which basically requires you to boot from the Windows 10 media. So this would be like a Windows 10 flash drive or a Windows 10 CD or DVD. So you'll need to boot from the Windows 10 media for a few different reasons. If you need to adjust the layout of the system disk, for example, Windows 10 includes a program in the disk management tools for deleting, creating, formatting, and extending partitions. So if you need to do any one of those or just basically give your system a fresh start, typically you'll want to boot from the media to perform a clean installation. A clean installation, just for those of you that don't know, is an installation in which you're basically taking the operating system back down to the studs. So it removes all the programs, all the files, all the settings, and makes everything default. So if you're doing a clean installation, typically you're doing that as a part of a new build, or you're doing it as a way to remove a virus completely, or just to give your machine a fresh start. So you can install Windows 10 alongside another operating system. This is called a multi-boot environment. So you can actually do this with a number of different operating systems. Windows 7, Windows 8, Windows 10, those all include options for installing Windows alongside another operating system. Finally, you want to boot from the Windows 10 media, as I said before, to do a clean installation of Windows 10. This basically just allows you to take your operating system back down to the studs. In addition to these, there's also a few other options or other reasons for booting from the Windows 10 media. We'll talk a little bit more about those when we discuss backup and recovery. But just to give you a little bit of a preview, you can use the Windows 10 boot media to enter into some of the recovery tools or repair a broken installation with the media. So again, we'll talk about other things you can do with the media in a later module. So let's talk about the upgrade paths from Windows 7 and 8 to Windows 10. So running setup from Windows 7 or 8.1 allows for the transfer of settings and programs to the new installation. So in other words, you can simply run the upgrade and then your operating system will be upgraded from Windows 7 to Windows 10 or from Windows 8 to Windows 10. Now, we already mentioned the pre-upgrade checker that will run when you run this application, just to make sure that your system is indeed compatible with the addition of Windows 10 you're trying to install. But there are some disadvantages to running an upgrade. So we talked about clean installation already. That's where you take the installation of your operating system down to the studs. You basically will remove all the applications, all the programs, all the files, settings, and you'll be left with just a vanilla operating system. An upgrade installation, though, will preserve all of your files, folders, and settings and simply change the operating system files. Now, there is pros and cons to each. A clean installation leaves you with a surprise, a little bit of a cleaner installation. However, it requires a lot more work to preserve your files, folders, and settings because you've got to do a backup of them. An upgrade installation, on the other hand, will basically just preserve everything, but since you're upgrading the operating system files while the system's still running, you can run into some issues in which the upgrade goes awry, and then you're forced to do a clean installation anyways. Moral of the story is no matter which path you go, always do a backup, and we'll talk about backups in a later module. So other things to keep in mind here, the Windows 10 edition must be equivalent or higher than the installed version. See table 2-1, that's page 27 of your textbook. So when we say higher, there are different versions of Windows 10 that are available. So for instance, we have Windows 10 Home and Windows 10 Professional. But in previous versions of operating system, for example, Windows 7 had several different types of versions. So they had Starter being the very most basic. They had Home Basic, Home Premium, Professional, Enterprise, and Ultimate. So that table in your book basically will list which editions your upgrade will allow you to upgrade to. So for example, if you have Windows 7 Professional, it's pretty easy. You can upgrade directly to Windows 7 Pro. If you've got Windows 7 Starter, Home Basic, or Home Premium, you can upgrade directly to Windows 10 Home. Hope that makes sense. Finally, if the upgrade path is unsupported, the installation will only provide the transfer personal files option. So in this instance, it's kind of a little bit of a hybrid between an upgrade and a clean installation. It'll perform the clean installation, but it will transfer all of your files from the previous operating system to the new operating system. In terms of successful upgrades, I can give you some anecdotal evidence here. I have done about 50 or 60 upgrades from Windows 7 and Windows 8 to Windows 10, and I've only run into a handful of issues. So the upgrade process has been very refined from what it's been in the past. It's definitely much easier than it has been. So let's just briefly talk about how the Windows 10 setup process works. So first off, there's a hidden folder that contains the files used during both the online and offline phases of the setup. So this is usually located in C$windows.bt. Again, and this is a hidden folder. For those of you that had taken advantage of the free upgrade that Microsoft gave last year from Windows 7 or 8 to Windows 10, this folder was delivered automatically to you as part of a Windows update. This actually made a lot of people angry, especially for those who are on very limited connections with data caps, because it would download about 8 gigs in the background without giving you prior notice. But basically what this folder is it's a hidden folder that contains all of the setup files. The reason that this folder gets created in the offline phases of setup and not just the online one is because it wants to protect your operating system installation in the event that the media, the installation media gets removed during the setup. So say you've got a USB flash drive in there that's installing Windows, and then you accidentally unplug it, well, the Windows installation will keep on chugging. There's also another file called windows.old, usually located in the root of the C drive, and this is created only when you perform an upgrade or do a clean installation on a volume that already contains a Windows installation. And basically what this does is it takes all of the old Windows files, settings, programs, basically everything that the old version of Windows needed to run and compresses it down into a single file. This file can be used for recovery. It's also used as part of the setup process for an upgrade to transfer the data from one operating system to another. So let's discuss activating Windows. So now that you've got your Windows 10 installation all taken care of, you've got to make sure that you activate it with Microsoft. And this is basically a method of proving that you have purchased the operating system or otherwise acquired it legitimately. So product activation happens shortly after the setup completes and installs Windows 10. It involves communications between the PC and Microsoft's licensing servers. So this would be Microsoft licensing servers online. The activation status for the device is actually stored online, and future activations are done automatically. So one of the interesting things, this is for those of you that have done custom computer builds where you purchased all of the hardware yourself, you're probably asking, well, how is this? How does it store my key online and activate it automatically? It actually creates a unique hardware hash or unique cache based upon your hardware configuration. So even if you don't have an OEM system, you can still activate without needing to put the product key in again. So that's one of the pros to Windows 10, or one of the advantages to Windows 10 over previous operating systems. If you lose the license, you still can activate your system if you need to reinstall. Genuine installations are issued a Windows 10 license certificate by the Microsoft licensing server. So basically this is just a file that sits out on your machine that's issued by Microsoft and says that you have successfully activated Windows. So along with going through the one-time setup for activating Windows, Microsoft also continually requires you to prove that the copy of Windows you have is genuine. So it verifies the copy you have of Windows has not been tampered with to bypass activation. So one way that I've seen a few people try to bypass the activation unsuccessfully would be to clone your hard drive and put it into another computer. Because it generates a unique hardware signature, the activation is going to re-trigger if it detects that your hardware has drastically changed. So there's two ways that it verifies your hardware, or it verifies your system is valid. The first is an internal tool that regularly checks licensing and activation files to determine if they've been tampered with. So that's that certificate that we were talking about in the previous slide. This tool checks that licensing certificate to make sure it hasn't been tampered with. There's also another online tool that restricts access to some downloads and updates. So basically this online tool works with the licensing server and verifies that your Windows is still valid, or your copy of Windows is still valid. So you might be asking, well, what happens if the system fails validation? So if the system fails validation on the computer, believe it or not, the machine will continue to work. There will be some differences, however. So the desktop will be black, so you won't be able to apply a wallpaper. An Activate Now reminder will pop up and prompt you continuously to activate Windows. An Activate Now dialog box periodically. Now that said, you can still use your computer unactivated. However, if you do that in a business environment, you open up your business to all sorts of lawsuits from Microsoft. Microsoft does periodically audit its business customers, and as a Microsoft customer, you are required by law to comply with the audit, and if not, you can get some pretty hefty fines from Microsoft. So in a business environment especially, it's always best to just go the extra mile and pay for your operating system. Don't try to get away with inactivated copies or unactivated copies. So entering in the product key. So there's a few ways you can go about entering in the product key in Windows 10. There's two ways you can, or three ways you can do this. So the product key, let's just talk about the product key first, and then we'll talk about how to do it in the next slide. So the product key is entered automatically when Windows 10 is pre-installed. So this will be pre-installed by an OEM, and it's usually stored in the system firmware. So this will be in the BIOS somewhere. The product key must match the Windows edition, so you can't install Windows 10 Professional and use a Windows 10 Home product key. You have to have a Windows 10 Professional product key in order for it to work. Most Windows 10 upgrades don't require a product key, so if you are upgrading from Windows 7, you don't need a brand new product key. You can use the same product key you used for Windows 7. Same thing for Windows 8. The architecture of your system does not need to match your product key. So if you have a if you have a if you have a 32-bit or 64-bit system, the architecture of your system doesn't necessarily matter. It just needs to be a valid product key. And you are not always required to enter a product key when performing a clean installation. So I mentioned in the last slide that Windows will automatically activate your system whenever you do a clean install, even if you have custom built your computer. And that's because it takes the sum of the hardware, it generates an encryption hash, and then it stores it on Microsoft servers. So each hardware in essence is unique. So let's go over some of the various ways to activate Windows. There are two GUI, graphical user interface, ways to activate Windows in Windows 10. I'm going to show you the legacy way to do it. So this will be the way to do it in Windows 8 and Windows 7. So if you right-click Start and then you select System, you're going to pop open this console here that gives you some information about your system. You can see here we've got Windows 10 Pro installed. We can see the information about our system. So I've got 3 gigs of RAM, an Intel i7, so on and so forth. You can see here this bottom section says Windows is not activated. Now if we were to click this in Windows 7, a different type of menu would pop up, but it looks relatively the same, or functions relatively the same as the menu we're about to see. So I'm going to click Activate Windows. And then this menu is going to pop up, and if we had a machine that was an OEM machine that we were doing a clean installation on, Windows would automatically activate itself if we had activated it one other time. But you can see this is a new virtual machine, and it's saying that Windows 10 is not activated. So if we wanted to activate it, what we'd have to do is we'd have to click Change Product Key. It's going to ask us if we really want to do that. We'll say yes. And then from here, we type our product key in. So it's going to try to find out if that product key we entered was valid. You can see here that it wasn't, but if it was, then it would say success, and then you'd click OK. So in Windows 10, there is something called the settings menu, which we're going to explore at a later date. But the settings menu is basically a way for it's an easier, more simplified version of the control panel. The settings menu also contains a way for you to activate Windows. So you can click System, and then we can go down, or excuse me, Settings, and then we can go down to About, and then we can click Change Product Key or Upgrade Your Edition of Windows, and then that takes us right back to that same menu we were at before. If you click Go to Store, you could actually go to the Microsoft Store, and then you could buy a different copy of Windows. So if you needed to buy Windows 10 Pro and you had Windows 10 Home, you could buy a key through there. Now there's another way to do this, and that is done through the command line. So this term we're going to be exploring the command line in depth. So to get there, we're just going to click Start, and then I'm just going to type CMD. And then we'll click Command Prompt. And then from there, there's a command, slmgr. This is the command that we would use for looking at our activation status. To find out info on how to use the command, and this is true for just about any command in the Windows operating systems, you can do /, so slmgr space /?. And then this is going to tell us how to use this command. So if we wanted to install a product key, for example, we can see here that we say slmgr, and then we'll use the option /ipk, and we'll type the product key, and that will install a product key for us. So let's talk about the different ways activation is handled depending on the type of copy you have of Windows 10. So activation of a retail copy. This happens automatically within 3 days via the internet. A retail copy can be activated via the phone. So this would be a process where you would use the phone activation if for whatever reason the product key you purchased wasn't working, or if the computer wasn't connected to the internet and you needed to activate it. You can activate it via a telephone number. So this requires a 50-digit unique identification key. So this is something that you'll give to Microsoft. And then it requires a 42-digit confirmation ID. So this is something you will receive from Microsoft during this phone call. It's basically an automated system, and that automated system will walk you through activating Windows. You can reinstall Windows 10 an unlimited number of times on the same piece of hardware. This differs from past versions of Windows. It used to be 3 to 5 installations per key, and then you'd have to call each time and tell Microsoft that you are reinstalling it. So because of the way that Microsoft has developed the hardware hash, you're able to activate Windows 10 an unlimited number of times on the same piece of hardware without any issues. So the activation is handled a little bit differently depending on the type of OEM. So large firms, they will typically store the key in the BIOS, and they will activate automatically as part of the installation process of the operating system. This is because, again, the key is stored in the BIOS. Smaller computer building firms, on the other hand, may require some installation setup or some users to enter in some information on the first boot. So this would be, they'd give you a key, they give you an OEM copy of Windows. You can actually purchase those from retail channels, just as long as you're building a PC for someone. So this would be like a mom and pop store building a PC for someone. So this is where it gets kind of interesting, especially if you're one of the part of the team in your environment that is responsible for deploying Windows 10 or a custom edition of Windows 10. So again, a volume license is a single key that Microsoft gives you, and then you apply that to all of the computers in your environment. Activation of corporate licensing uses a volume license. It auto-activates a number of devices based upon the volume license. There's a little typo in that slide. So based upon the number of devices you have and your licensing agreement, you can activate as many or as few as you want. It just essentially costs money. So there's a few ways that you can handle that. You could use something called a key management server. So maybe you have multiple volume licenses, or maybe you want to just keep track of individual licenses. You can use a KMS to do that. You can also just rely upon the volume license to activate against Microsoft servers. There's a few reasons you'd want a key management server versus the activation of a volume license with Microsoft servers, but that's a topic for another module. And we went over this in a previous slide, but it's good to talk about it. So Windows activation can be handled via the command prompt. Again, we're going to be talking a lot about doing things in the command prompt in this class. So the command to activate Windows is slmgr, and this is actually available in Windows 7 and Windows 8. So to display the current licensing status, slmgr /DLI, that will give you information about the current license status. Now there are a variety of different command line switches that you can use with this command to do different things. We saw on the previous slide that we used a different set of switches to actually install a license key. So you can use that slmgr /? to receive those prompts that have all of the various command line switches and what they do. So tweaking and tuning Windows 10 installation. So this would be after you've done your upgrade and after you've done your install. So first thing you want to do, check your device manager for missing drivers. We are going to take a look at how to do that in more depth in a future module, but this is something that you should keep in your back pocket for now. You definitely want to adjust the display settings, especially if you have a computer that has multiple displays or if it has a high resolution display. Sometimes the graphics card driver won't automatically apply the correct resolution, so you want to make sure the display settings are correct. This one's really important. You want to check to make sure you have a network connection, especially one that's connected up to the internet. This is how Microsoft is delivering all of their updates. And if you're not connected to the internet, chances are you're not going to pull security updates, and you're going to have a hard time updating your programs and downloading things and connecting to your favorite websites. You want to verify that your security settings transferred over, especially if you've done an upgrade installation. Oftentimes, one of the deterrents for an upgrade going successfully is a antivirus software running. If you have antivirus software running, typically you want to turn that off before you do an upgrade. And after you're done with the upgrade, then you can turn it back on. So make sure you verify your security settings. Check Windows Update and check it more than one time. So one of the things that Windows is notorious for, especially after a new install, so you're going to have a ton of updates that you're going to need to install. So the first round of updates that you apply might not be the last round of updates that you need to apply before you get fully updated. So check Windows Update. It'll probably ask you to reboot after it downloads everything. After you've rebooted, check Windows Update again until it finally has said, hey, there's no more updates for me to grab. You want to change your default programs. One of the things that my office often has to do is we have to change the default from Edge to Internet Explorer. I showed you that in a previous slide in this video. Oftentimes, and part of the upgrade process will change those defaults. So you want to make sure that the default programs are what they expect them to be. Finally, you want to adjust the power and sleep settings. Oftentimes those stay the same between one operating system to another, but it's always good to just double check to make sure that it's functioning like it should.